for joining me.
Thank you.
And everybody, remember to download the app because we want to make sure that we get questions at the end of this session. So before we start, Lule, I have a couple of questions. Who's heard of crypto and DeFi? Show of hands. Cryptocurrency, DeFi, a lot of hands in the building right now. Now, who can say they actually understand crypto and DeFi? Not as many hands in the building right now, okay? My first question for you, Lule, is, are you hot?
Am I hot?
Yes.
That's a loaded question, dude.
No, because this is the
yeah,
hot seat.
it is hot.
So you're supposed to be
It's
hot in
hot,
the hot
yeah.
seat, okay? Now,
The breeze is nice, though.
we had a conversation before meeting here, right? And we talked a lot about retail investor access. And that's important to me and dear to my heart because the communities that I come from didn't have access to some of the investments and the financial services that we are so passionate about. So first, how are you working, right, to make all the services that you have and make this industry more accessible to people who are usually disenfranchised?
I mean, a few things. So I've been in this industry for many years as a user of the instruments in it, as well as a provider. And I think one of those ways is to make sure that we don't make the language as inaccessible. We don't make the concept feel like people have to get a PhD to understand it.
Correct.
And we have to make the products and services accessible, whether it's fees or user experience or education. So I think it's both a representation and a language choice as well as the product design.
Right. Going back to those neighborhoods and those communities, many people felt empowered with cryptocurrency, especially in the early days, right? I remember playing football at University of Cal Berkeley, and they would come to me and like, hey man, you gotta get on this cryptocurrency. This is the way to build wealth. Mm-hmm. Now that it's been a productization of cryptocurrency, how do you feel like that affects retail investor success?
Yeah, I mean, it's still very much in its very, very early years. And the narrative I hear about crypto now is what I used to hear when I saw the dot-com bubble burst, which was like, this thing is a phantom, it's a promise without any future. And I feel like to some extent, that's what's going on. Every single crypto winter brings about a new transformation of what the promise of crypto is, and I have no doubt that that will be the case in the future. Mm-hmm. So as a wealth building, the way I try to explain to people to think about crypto is not just in terms of your asset accumulation, but also as a mechanism to ownership as a means of learning what that does, right? I think what you said back to the communities getting access, you know, one of the ways to get your brain and your mind to learn is to own. Yeah. And so I think that whether crypto is on a high or a low, the practice of ownership, whatever is that you can afford, opens the window to learn about this space. And once you start learning, there's no going back. Absolutely.
Let's talk about misinformation and fear-mongering. You mentioned crypto winter. And I remember one of my friends, didn't have anything invested. He got into crypto. He's like, it's crypto winter. Now is the time to buy. Mm-hmm. I always say that investors have to separate the news from the noise, right? Mm-hmm. And particularly when it comes to DeFi and crypto, there's a lot of noise. Yeah. You don't know who to listen to. You don't know which mediums to subscribe to. But you're trying to find that piece of information that can change your financial trajectory, right? Yeah. So what advice would you have for investors that want to get into the crypto space? They hear their girlfriends, their guy friends, they hear their family talking about this thing, but they don't know where to get educated. So how can investors separate the news from the noise?
Yeah, you know, it's funny because I feel like the last 3 years, I was telling somebody this, my own family started talking about money and digital assets in a way that we didn't talk about money at our Thanksgiving dinners or Christmas or anything like that. So I think that it's already in the zeitgeist in terms of our cultural reality. So the advice I give people is, at the end of the day, you cannot have a get-rich-quick logic to any kind of innovation, because innovation by definition is going to have highs and lows. What you want to do is come in and go at the level that you can afford, right? And still stick around when the lows are there. Yeah. You know, just because I don't know when the future of digital assets transforming us at the same degree that Web 2 disintegrated sort of disintermediated everything, it doesn't mean it's not happening, right? Just because we don't know when the future date is, it doesn't mean the future is not happening. Yeah. So one of the things I advise people to do is stay at a level that doesn't freak you up, but stay. Because staying is how you learn.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%. Now, looking at the future, engaging the future, right? You once said to me, which I think is profound, you said that you have to calibrate your expectations for the future. right? And when you said that, I kind of went to my own business and I was looking at what I wanted my future to look like, right? When I say that I'm Sarte Yarmne, financial advisor, investor, community builder, how do I calibrate my expectations so that I can be patient enough to plant seeds that will eventually grow to trees? And a lot of the times we make these investments, right, and we want that tree to pop up tomorrow, right? So can you expand on the idea of calibrating your expectations for the future, particularly with cryptocurrency and DeFi?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because one of the things that I think is hard to do is to have hope in the time where the narrative or when a bear market hits usually, or a winter in this case, the narrative is like, oh my God, it was always a swindle, it was always a lie, it was always this. And I think that that counter narrative is just as dangerous as a narrative of get rich quick, right? So the way that I sort of navigate that not too high, not too low, is to make sure that ultimately, can I stick around even in the dark? So if I put this money in, if the market goes down by X, can I stick around? The other way I calibrate is to not think of it just as an investment asset. As I told you, like, I think that if you only look at crypto as a store of asset, what happens is you miss out on the opportunity as an individual to learn about the future of DeFi and what it's going to do. That is, it's going to revolutionize things. And so if people think of crypto just as some portfolio asset they sit on, in my opinion, they've actually undervalued the very nature of what it's supposed to do, which is open their eyes to learn about this space even more. So I think it's both. It's learning more about it beyond it being a store of asset. I think that captures your imagination and allows you to have that endurance for leveling not too high, not too low. And then also making sure you're investing enough not to be scared when it goes low.
Yeah. You talked about the industry, right? Creating this narrative that the future is tomorrow. And we're at future proof. So obviously we're all inclined to be optimistic about the future. But you said something that stood out to me. You said people need to think of the future not as tomorrow, but the day after tomorrow. And often when I'm on my personal journey to build my business, I always am thinking really long term, right? So do you think the industry is being too optimistic about the future and when that time is? And how do we calibrate that as an industry, right? Those expectations as an industry.
Yeah. I would say about a year ago and 2 years ago, it was a little too optimistic. And so people's sort of zeal and overzealousness turned into a bubble, right? I would say now we're actually in danger of doing the other way, which is that we are getting too pessimistic. And so we will scare off individuals who should stick around to learn, so they're not coming back in when all of us have figured out this thing is going to have another cycle. So I think it's the other way around now, that we are in danger of popping dreams. And we have to make sure that that's not also happening the same way that we didn't have false dreams before. And I think that one of the things that's so exciting about the space I'm in, I'm at eToro, which is a digital asset company that also offers other kinds of capital investments that individuals can partake in. And I think one of the ways that we are able to have an orientation towards the future is also seeing younger investors and what they do. Our investor base is millennial or younger. And I'll tell you that they became cautious during these last cycles, but they didn't exit. The majority of them actually said, I'm going to keep. So I think also we have a lot to learn from younger people who have an appreciation that they have a higher horizon and how they interpret bears and winters.
If you had to take a guess, why would you say that the younger folks stuck to their investments this time around? Was it their conviction? Was it just the amount of education available to them now versus in the past? What was that thing?
What was the thing that changed it?
Yeah.
I think the proliferation of capabilities like eToro and other digital asset companies and other investment companies that made it easier to invest. The last round, we didn't have the level of on your app, easy ways to access the markets, easy ways to access investing. So I think that ease of use has kept people around to know that either they can log, for instance, I'll give you an example. Over 99%, 95% of our customers still log in on a regular basis, even if they're not buying, right? So I think the ease of use that the proliferation of the software that has done this has made it, I think, more probable that they stick around. The other is that it has entered our cultural zeitgeist the way it's never entered it before. I mean, people talk about money and investing now in a way across generations that just didn't happen 10 years ago. And I just think once something gets into the cultural zeitgeist, it's really hard to pluck it out.
Yeah. When you talk about the cultural zeitgeist, right? Expand on that idea. Is cryptocurrency here to stay, one? And what does the future look like with crypto and DeFi being embedded in our culture?
Yeah, so I think it's here to stay regardless. It may not have, in one border or another, right? So in other words, if a country is too regulated, it may go somewhere else,
Yeah.
right? To be able to be thriving somewhere else. But the reason why it's here to stay is because its use cases and what it's solving is unbound by our imaginations in terms of what it could solve. I mean, you look at, for example, in the last 3 years, crypto ownership of the top 10, 3 were African nations. 3 was Asian nations. I mean,
Wow.
it is the most diversely owned asset class in the history of asset class ownership.
Yeah.
That is not because they were swindled,
Yeah.
right? It's because it was solving different things. For some people, it was solving the fact that their local currencies were not as reliable. For some people, it was because they wanted to cut the middleman in terms of transaction fees. You know, the other day I was just trying to send money to my in-laws that were in the Philippines because they had a life crisis. And it was easier to do it through crypto if I could than it was doing it in any other traditional finance rails, if you will. So ultimately, I think, it has real things in the real financial world that it will solve. And for that reason, I think it's here to stay.
What do you think some pitfalls of cryptocurrency could be? And then we're going to jump into some of the questions that we have. So if you are on the app, feel free to ask questions. This is the hot seat. What do you think are some of the pitfalls that we might have as we further adopt cryptocurrency into our day-to-day life?
Some of it is the same thing that happens in any innovation, which is that people don't have the patience for an innovation to perfect its process, right? It breaks. What happened in the last few cycles, right? Things breaking, and it's getting the technology becoming more hardened. And so people might perceive that hardening that has to happen in the technology is the same thing as somebody trying to steal money from them, or that it's not safe, right? So I think one of it's the sort of the hazards we have to worry of is like just to have the patience for innovation and what kind of highs and lows innovations have, right? The second, I think, is the pitfalls of, whether it's we don't do an elegant way of regulating it, right? We try to stifle the innovation instead of protecting the individuals or the people in it or leveling the playing field, which all good regulation does. And the third is our own inner greed, right? We have to make sure that we are calibrating what we want out of it in a way that's not just a get-rich-quick scheme.
Yeah, I love that. You talked about the stifles of regulation. This is decentralized finance, right? It was supposed to be unregulated. So do you think that as we want to adopt this, we take away the sole purpose for some of the DeFi structure in the first place?
Yeah, I think that the idea of a common rule set is not a bad thing. Like, I think good regulation can make innovation thrive. So DeFi, by definition, is not necessarily, at least in my opinion, I don't think it's in order for decentralized finance to thrive, traditional finance has to fall. I do not think of them in binary terms.
Yep.
The reality is the world needs more means of capital formation. There's not enough that's penetrating from a capital access to people. So anything that brings more capital formation affordability to individuals, whether it's here or across the world, is a welcome toolkit in our set. And so to my mind's eye, they can work in tandem together. Does that mean that DeFi could take more share? Yes, but I think the pie will get bigger, right? The more people in Nigeria, Venezuela, et cetera, have access to capital formation, that means the bigger the pie gets. And so I just think we have to think in terms of and not in terms of or.
I love that. I love that. Let's go to these questions here. It says, since blockchain technology has been around for 30 years, what are the use cases available today that will make this time different? I think you hit on some a little bit earlier, but go ahead and kind of review some of these various use cases that can be very useful for us.
No, and I think that's a fair question, right? Like, why hasn't the future arrived yet? Right? And I think that's a fair question, but it's one of those things I feel like nobody is as wise as the day the future does arrive. And then everybody says, I knew the future was coming, right? And so the answer is, like, I don't know when the future is going to come, for sure. That's a wise question, and I can see, skepticism is a good, healthy thing to have. But I do think that what has happened now is different from 30 years ago in the sense that there have, as I said, real case live issues that DeFi has solved even today.
Yeah.
It may not be, in terms of being able to buy, ice cream over there with my Bitcoin. It might not be as simple as that, but the reality is financial transactions are not just the ones that are, buying something, going to the store. It could be, as I said, vendors exchanging value together because they do not want to pay a middleman, which happens today already, right? In Nigeria, Ethiopia, and all these places. It could be about people sending remittances. Remittances have become, this form of technology has become one of the highest means of sending money home for a lot of immigrants. It could be the place where we do universal income distribution. I could tell you about that, what we've done at eToro. Yeah. So there's so many use cases now that just did not happen 10, 15 years ago. I still think we're still scratching the surface, though, that there's more to come. Yeah. When that is, it's as good a guess as yours as mine.
That's a great answer. We got another question from the audience. There's so many different choices in cryptocurrency, yes, and DeFi. How do you choose what to invest in? And is there a reasonable way to diversify in this space?
Yeah, so I can only tell you sort of like how I approach it. So I joined eToro a year ago because I really deliberately wanted to remain in the championship of access of capital markets to retail investors. We have stocks and in the coming soon options that we offer, but I definitely wanted to be in the place of digital assets as well. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that's so interesting about digital assets that I've seen, and this is why I think it's magical to have this idea of access to track, access to learn, not just access to invest in. Yep. What I mean by that is you can go on our website and actually just practice tracking these assets rather than putting capital at risk. And so the way I look at my digital asset journey is there are digital assets that I will invest in, and then there are digital assets that I will track because I find the project interesting. Mm-hmm. I find what they're trying to solve interesting. And actually, it's a good thing. We want more and more digital foundations and start out to try to crack the code of the future. If we do not have lots of founders and innovators finding new ways to create digital assets, we will not find the future of the digital asset world. So it's a great thing. That doesn't mean people should go around buying 50 coins for their portfolio. But they should definitely be tracking them at least.
I love it. I love it. We got another question from Gavin, my man. Digital advice offerings have been extensions of current business models. For example, robo adding humans or vice versa. Are completely new hybrid models yet to be launched?
I don't know. I know I'm at an asset management conference, so I have to be, diplomatic in the way I say this. But I love breaking normal. That's my lifetime. And I think that as much as we hunger the idea of productizing innovations quickly, whether it's in robos or in ETFs or other things, I'm more interested in that the genesis of the innovation really advancing. Yeah. And I think that if we just leave that, just give it room to innovate and keep growing, we won't add this other added layer of saying, can you actually hold it in a portfolio then? But there are plenty of digital assets that has been answered for, right? Bitcoin being one of them, that you can actually look at as a means of store of assets that's standard. Yep.
Next question, how much money inflow into crypto slowed this year? I know that this has been kind of a rough time, a volatile time for crypto. You used the phrase crypto winter. Yeah. It feels like summer out here today, but how have the inflow slowed
It ain't a winter
down?
for nothing.
Right.
Yeah. No, it's a winter. At its height, what was it? About 2 trillion, right, in terms of what was owned globally. That's definitely grown down more. Obviously, it's gotten a little better of late. I would say, in general, I don't have the latest numbers, but I'd say, in general, it's a winter. So it's a sizable reduction. I do think, though, when you look at the generational difference, so for example, as I said, our platform has millennials or younger. A lot of those are buy and hold, as they call them, hodl, right? Yeah. Buy and hold individuals. So even though the valuation has grown down, there are a lot of people that are sitting on those assets still.
Yeah, I have a question for you in terms of the productization of cryptocurrency and DeFi, right? I really feel like that took away from the initial use case. So tell us the pros and cons of the productization. Obviously, access is going to be a pro because more people might feel comfortable in investing in the asset. Yeah. But from your standpoint, what would be some pros and cons of this productization?
I think productization that is its foundation is purely the riding of high of the asset is dangerous. But productization for the purpose of, because productization could be in whose eyes, right? In the beholder, the eyes of the beholder, right? Me turning a cryptocurrency into a universal income tool is a productization. Me figuring out how to hold blockchain, Bitcoin in a portfolio is a form of productization. So I think as long as we know that the productization is not trying to ride a high, but rather to multiply what is the future, I think it's very good, because you can't have mass adoption in our culture without productization. I mean, productization by definition is a means of adoption, right? I just think we have to be wise not to make that productization choke out the future.
Absolutely, that was very well said. We have another question here from an anonymous guest. They say, where do advisors fit in the crypto DeFi space from the perspective of a retail platform CEO?
You know, so I have such deep appreciation for advisors. I started my career supporting advisors at JP Morgan. I started a very classic advisory company. I became an advisor at Merrill Lynch. I supported advisors at Morgan Stanley. I have a very deep appreciation for the nobility of what advisors do, which is helping people build wealth for generational transfer or is for their own retirement or whatever else, right? So I think that advisors hold a very holy space in seeding this sense of curiosity in their customers, right? In sense of, when I say curiosity, as I said, you don't have to own something to track it. You don't have to feel like you're giving up control by encouraging your customer to go to a digital asset website to start tracking or trying out something, right? It is not a lack of control, but I actually think it's a form of allowing your customer to grow. So I think advisors have a very important moral sort of ground to drive here, and if we drive that ground and we do not take that responsibility well, and it's all we do is just talk about how dangerous it is, I think we are basically dooming our customers and not understanding a space they must understand, because in 10 to 15 years, people who do not understand this space will be left behind.
Yeah, can we talk about that for a minute? 5 years ago, you had advisors that were just against cryptocurrency and the entire space. No, don't do it. This is the worst thing you can do. You're putting your money at risk, right?
Yeah.
And then maybe 2.5 years later from that, people are like, you should allocate 1 to 3% of your money into cryptocurrency, particularly Bitcoin, right? I find that many advisors just don't understand the space, right? So how can advisors get educated about cryptocurrency?
and that's okay. You know, like I will tell people, like I started out maybe 4 to 5 years ago, really in earnest understanding the space as a tracker, and then eventually as an investor, and eventually as a CEO. And it's been a ball. I tell this everybody, like I have more divots in my brain now than I did in the first 10 years of my career. It's been such a ball learning about it, and there's no shame starting with not knowing anything. You know? So I think the first place to start is what's so great about crypto and the area of DeFi is that it's actually become a cultural thing and not just a financial thing. So there's plenty of, whether it's podcasts or books you can read that can really invite you into understanding what the space is. Why are people so crazy about it? Why is it such a cultural phenomenon? And there are so many different ways that you can get into that through just your ride to work every day by listening to different podcasts. And then eventually, like once you understand the sort of the tick-tick sort of makeup of it, there's websites that you can learn. There are people, influencers that are amazing thinkers that I listen to on a regular basis.
Yeah, you know, traditional finance had a very hard time adjusting to cryptocurrency and its demand, right, from popular culture of the asset. Why do you think that was? Why was it so hard for traditional advisors to say, hey, this might be a part of the future?
I mean, I think if you assume positive intent, the first is they want to protect their customers, right? And so they want to be aware of anything that feels like another get-rich-quick sort of mechanism. So I appreciate that probably was the starting point. And then eventually, like all humans, the not wanting change to happen gene starts kicking in, right? And we just have to be wary that we are doing that advice for the sake of protecting our customers and not the fear of the future part of it.
Absolutely. I have another question here from John. He says, can you comment on the flippening? The flippening.
Can I comment on the flipping? No, I cannot.
No, she cannot.
I mean, I cannot.
All right, next question for you. I want to ask you a question. So imagine a future, right, where cryptocurrency is adopted, or
I
people
think he meant the merge, by the way. Okay, go on.
the merge.
It's okay. Yeah.
What is your take, or what is your hope for the future, right? As we progress, as this gets productized, as you would like to say, right? As more countries begin to use this cryptocurrency as a means for access and exchange, how does it look for you? How do we incorporate that in a day-to-day? I think that people have a hard time figuring that part out, right? And that's part of the miseducation.
Yeah.
So if you can imagine a world 5, 10 years from now, what does that look like?
Yeah.
Practically.
So I don't know the time, 5, 10,
Right.
15 years, right? But we do know one thing about technology is that it keeps bending time.
Yeah.
That we know that, right? And so I do think that time is bound to be bent by this as well. And that's one of the reasons I said, like, we do a disservice to our friends, our family, our customers in not having them become curious, DeFi curious at least, in understanding. And so your question was sort of like, how do we get into that, so that 5 to 10 year period doesn't miss us out, right?
Right.
And I think the way we do it, as I said, is practice. Practice, practice, practice. Track it, start dabbling in it, listen to things about it, understand where this is solving. I mean, one of the things that I think is really hard about this round versus like a dot-com phenomenon, which was still, for the most part, within the boundaries of our country, right? When you think about it, it was all in Silicon Valley or whatever. So you can see it happening here.
Yeah.
I think that's what's so hard about DeFi is that what you're not realizing is the revolution is happening globally. So because you can't see it, it's really hard for the brain to contemplate how to see the change, right? And so I think the way to do it is to, as I said, track it, learn it, practice it, get curious about it.
I love that. We had a question from Chris Randall. Are you alarmed by the number of bad actors that are taking advantage of the retail customers? And how do we eliminate bad actors in crypto? And I think this is one of the questions about getting educated, right, and staying close. But what's your take on that?
Am I alarmed about bad actors? Well, I'm originally from a third world country, and it came to America, so I'm not really surprised by bad actors in general. And I would say, I think what I would say is every industry has bad actors.
Yep.
We just went through, recently in 2008, mortgage industry had bad actors and nearly melted down our economy.
Yeah.
I think that the key is going to be clear and concise regulation and fair play that make sure, for example, good AML rules, right, which exists already, but just making sure that they're even more tighter and prolific so that it's not hiding dark money. Just making sure that the regulations are fair and steady, I think, will help. But that doesn't mean bad actors. Bad actors are like water through concrete, right?
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, I feel like part of it is going to be fair regulation. Part of it is as well, good people staying in this space. Like if we keep on scaring everybody off, and then it'll stay a dark spot, and I don't want that to happen, right? Like we need this to be adopted and continually adopted into the zeitgeist of our everyday normal. So I think good regs, making sure that we all as human beings are learning about it and demystifying the good and the bad among our people. Good structures by financial companies like ours that we have. My compliance department is one of the largest in my entire division, right? So just making sure we're being responsible in the way we're governing it. But yeah, no doubt about it. Like all new things, when people are coming out west looking for gold, there was a lot of bad actors selling lots of goods to people, right? All innovations have bad actors.
Last question for you, something that's really dear to my heart, right? How do you feel like cryptocurrency and access to retail investing will help disenfranchised communities and the underrepresented, right? We got about 50 seconds here, so last question and then we can take it back.
I believe in the American dream of being able to own whatever I want. And so I think philosophically, I am against anything that tries to block regular people from being able to access things. I think it's important that regular people get to access, but they are educated, that they are given information and clear and concise understanding of what they're getting. But the answer is not to try to block them out of it, because to block them out of it by definition is to say the status quo should reign.
Yeah.
And that's not acceptable to me.
I love that, Lule. Thank you so much for joining me on the hot seat. We appreciate you for listening.